When my daughter rolled her eyes and called my church group Mom's Fossil Collection, I laughed it off. When my son-in-law smirked and said I was collecting retirement home prospects, I ignored the sting. But when I overheard my own daughter telling her friends that her mother spent her time with a bunch of broke old ladies playing bingo, I finally understood how little my family thought of the women who had become my closest companions. What they didn't know was that these so-called fossils were about to change my life in ways I never imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Catherine Walsh, and at 58, I thought I knew exactly where my life was headed. After 32 years of marriage, I'd finally convinced my husband, James, to take early retirement from his accounting firm. We had our modest savings, a paid-off house in suburban Denver, and what I believed would be comfortable golden years stretching ahead of us. Our daughter, Rebecca, lived 20 minutes away with her husband, Derek, and our 2 grandchildren, and I imagined lazy Sunday dinners and family vacations filling our time. What I hadn't anticipated was how isolating retirement would actually feel. James seemed content to spend his days tinkering in the garage and watching old westerns, but I found myself restless and lonely. The house felt too quiet during the day, and I missed the social interaction I'd taken for granted during my years working as a school administrator. That's when I started attending the weekly women's group at St. Margaret's Episcopal Church. I'd been a casual churchgoer for most of my adult life, showing up for Christmas and Easter and the occasional Sunday when guilt got the better of me. But the women's group met every Thursday morning for coffee, discussion, and what they cheerfully called fellowship. The first time I walked into the church basement and saw the circle of folding chairs occupied by women ranging from their 50s to their 80s, I almost turned around and left. The group was led by Eleanor Davidson, a 72-year-old woman with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. She welcomed me warmly, introducing me to the others with genuine enthusiasm. There was Margaret Chen, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s who had emigrated from Taiwan 30 years earlier. Dolores Martinez sat next to her, a vibrant 70-year-old with laugh lines that spoke of a life well lived. Patricia Williams, who went by Patty, was the youngest besides me, at 55, with an infectious laugh and a tendency to speak her mind. Then there was Rose Kowalski, whose Polish accent had softened over her 68 years in America, but never disappeared entirely. Helen Thompson, at 78, was the group's unofficial historian, with stories that could make you laugh until your sides hurt or bring tears to your eyes. And finally, there was Joyce Brennan, 67 years old with the posture of a ballet dancer and the gentle manner of someone who had seen enough of life to approach it with both wisdom and kindness. At first, I felt like an outsider looking in. These women had known each other for years, some for decades. They referenced shared experiences and inside jokes that left me feeling like I was watching a movie in a foreign language. But gradually, they drew me into their circle with the kind of patient kindness that I hadn't experienced since my own mother had passed away 10 years earlier. Our Thursday meetings officially focused on studying various books about faith, spirituality, and personal growth. But they quickly became about so much more. We talked about everything from the challenges of aging parents to the frustrations of adult children who seem to have their own lives completely figured out. We discussed politics, current events, personal struggles, and small triumphs with equal enthusiasm. What struck me most was how vibrant and engaged these women were. Eleanor spoke passionately about environmental issues and had recently organized a community garden project. Margaret had just returned from a solo trip to visit her elderly mother in Taiwan, managing all the travel arrangements herself despite her children's protests. Dolores was learning to paint watercolors and had just sold her first piece to a local gallery. Patty was training for a half marathon, something she had never attempted in her younger years. Rose had started a small catering business, specializing in traditional Polish foods, working farmers markets on weekends, and building a loyal customer base. Helen was writing her memoirs, having lived through everything from the civil rights movement to the dawn of the internet age. And Joyce had recently earned her real estate license, deciding at 67 that she wanted a new career challenge. These were not the stereotypical church ladies I had expected to find. They were intelligent, curious, ambitious women who approached life with an energy that many people half their age couldn't match. Yet somehow, my family had dismissed them as fossils without ever taking the time to actually meet them or understand who they were. The first hint that there was more to my new friends than met the eye came during our fourth meeting. We were discussing a book about financial independence when Eleanor mentioned offhandedly that she had just finished reviewing some investment portfolios. Margaret nodded knowingly and mentioned that she'd been watching the semiconductor market with interest. The conversation moved on quickly, but something about the casual way they discussed complex financial topics stuck with me. Over the following weeks, I began to notice other small details that didn't quite fit with my assumptions. Patty drove a sleek BMW that looked like it had just rolled off the lot. Eleanor's handbag was clearly designer, though she wore it with such understated elegance that it took me weeks to recognize the brand. Margaret mentioned traveling to conferences in New York and Los Angeles with the same casual tone she used to discuss her grandchildren's soccer games. When I mentioned these observations to James, he shrugged them off. "Maybe they're spending their kids' inheritance," he said with a chuckle. "Good for them." But when I brought it up with Rebecca during one of our weekly phone calls, her response was less charitable. "Mom, you need to be careful," she said, her voice taking on the patient tone she used when explaining something obvious to our 7-year-old grandson. "Older people are prime targets for financial scams. These church ladies probably talk a big game about investments to make themselves feel important, but I bet half of them are living on Social Security and cat food." The comment stung, partly because it revealed how little Rebecca thought of the women I'd grown to care about, and partly because it made me question my own judgment. Was I being naive? Were these women just engaging in wishful thinking about their financial situations? My doubts were put to rest the following Thursday when Eleanor announced that she had something special to share with the group. She opened her purse and pulled out a thick manila folder, setting it on the table with the kind of reverence usually reserved for precious artifacts. "Ladies," she said with a smile that could only be described as mischievous, "I wanted to show you something." She opened the folder to reveal what looked like official documents with the letterhead of a major investment firm. "Remember that little tech startup I mentioned a few months ago, the one developing sustainable energy storage solutions?" Margaret leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "The one you said had potential but was still in early stages?"
That's the one, Eleanor confirmed. "Well, they just went public, and my initial investment of $50,000 is now worth approximately $2.7 million. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt my mouth actually fall open as I processed what she'd just said. $50,000, $2.7 million. These numbers seem to belong in a different universe than our church basement discussion circle. Dolores was the first to speak, and she was laughing with genuine delight. "Eleanor, you magnificent woman! I told you that company had something special." She turned to the rest of us with sparkling eyes. "I bought in after Eleanor's recommendation, though not quite as heavily. My investment has done quite well, too." Rose nodded approvingly. "This is why we formed our investment club, yes? To share opportunities and learn from each other." She looked at me with sudden concern. "Catherine, you look pale. Are you all right?" I realized I'd been holding my breath. "Investment club?" I managed to ask. Patricia laughed, but not unkindly. "Oh, honey, did you think we just sat around talking about our feelings and planning bake sales?" She gestured around the circle. "This group has been pooling resources and sharing investment opportunities for over 15 years. We've all done quite well for ourselves." Helen leaned forward, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Catherine, dear, what exactly did you think we did with our time?" The question hung in the air, and I realized I'd never really thought about it at all. I'd made assumptions based on their age, their gender, and the setting of our meetings. I'd seen what I expected to see, rather than paying attention to what was actually in front of me. "I guess I thought you were just regular church ladies," I admitted, feeling foolish as the words left my mouth. Joyce smiled gently. Oh, sweetheart, we are regular church ladies. We just happen to also be investors, entrepreneurs, and business owners. Those aren't mutually exclusive things. Eleanor set her hand on my arm with maternal warmth. Catherine, may I ask what you and James have planned for your retirement finances? The question made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't quite articulate. We have some savings, a 401k, some CDs. We own the house. James thinks we'll be fine. The women exchanged glances that I couldn't interpret. Finally, Margaret spoke up. What kind of return are you getting on those CDs? About 2%, I answered, proud that I actually knew the number. The silence that followed was somehow worse than their earlier shock at Eleanor's announcement. It was the kind of silence that suggested I'd just admitted to something embarrassing without realizing it. Catherine, Dolores said gently, inflation is running at about 3% right now. That means your money is actually losing value every year it sits in those accounts. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. But it's safe, I protested. James says the most important thing is not to lose what we have. Safety is important, Eleanor agreed, but so is growth, especially when you're looking at potentially 30 or 40 years of retirement. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Have you calculated how much money you'll need to maintain your current lifestyle throughout retirement? I hadn't. James had assured me he'd run the numbers and we'd be fine, and I trusted his expertise. After all, he was the accountant in the family. But sitting in that church basement, surrounded by women who apparently understood financial planning in ways I'd never even considered, I began to realize that "we'll be fine" might not be the detailed analysis I'd assumed it was. The meeting continued, but I found it hard to concentrate on our book discussion. My mind kept circling back to the revelation that these women, whom my family had dismissed as irrelevant elderly busybodies, were apparently sophisticated investors with the kind of financial success I'd never even dreamed of achieving. As we prepared to leave, Eleanor approached me with that same gentle smile she'd worn at me when welcoming me to the group for the first time. Catherine, would you be interested in learning more about what we do?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
I don't want to pressure you, but if you're curious about financial planning and investment strategies, we'd be happy to share what we've learned over the years. I looked around the circle of faces, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. These weren't the stereotypical church ladies I'd imagined when I first joined the group. They were sharp, successful women who had built impressive financial portfolios while maintaining their commitment to faith, community, and lifelong learning. Yes, I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. I would very much like to learn. Eleanor's smile widened. Wonderful! Why don't you stay after next week's meeting? We can show you some of the resources we use and explain how our investment discussions work. As I drove home that afternoon, my mind was racing. I kept thinking about Rebecca's dismissive comments about broke old ladies and Derek's smirks about my fossil collection. They had no idea what they were talking about. More troubling, I was beginning to realize that I had no idea what I was talking about either when it came to our own financial situation. That evening, I approached James with what I thought would be a casual conversation about our retirement planning. Honey, could you show me the details of our financial plan? I'm curious about the specific numbers. James looked up from his crossword puzzle with mild irritation. Kathy, we've been over this. We're fine. I've handled our finances for 32 years without any problems. I know, I said carefully, but I'd like to understand the details myself. How much do we have saved? What kind of returns are we getting? How long will it last? He set down his pen with the exaggerated sigh he used when he thought I was being unnecessarily complicated. We have enough. That's all you need to know. Trust me, I'm the accountant. But for the first time in our marriage, his reassurances weren't enough. I'd spent my entire adult life trusting James to handle our money, while I focused on raising Rebecca and managing my career. It had never occurred to me to question his expertise or ask for detailed information about our financial situation. Now, however, I was beginning to understand that my ignorance wasn't just inconvenient, it might be dangerous. The following Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I arrived at the church 30 minutes early, hoping to catch Eleanor before the meeting started. I found her in the sanctuary, sitting quietly in one of the front pews with her eyes closed. I hesitated to interrupt what looked like a moment of private prayer, but she opened her eyes as I approached and smiled warmly. "Catherine, I'm so glad you're here. I brought some materials I thought you might find interesting." She gestured to a leather portfolio beside her. "But first, may I ask you something personal?" I nodded, though I felt nervous about what she might want to know. "Have you ever had a conversation with a financial advisor? Someone independent who could review your current situation and help you understand your options?" The question revealed another gap in my knowledge. "James handles all that. He says financial advisors just try to sell you products you don't need." Eleanor's expression was carefully neutral. "That can certainly be true of some advisors, but there are also fee-only advisors who work as fiduciaries, meaning they're legally required to put your interests ahead of their own. They can provide education and guidance without trying to sell you specific products." I'd never heard of fee-only advisors or fiduciaries, but I was too embarrassed to admit it. Instead, I asked, "How did you learn about all this? The investing, the financial planning?" Eleanor's laugh was rueful. "The hard way, I'm afraid. My husband died suddenly when I was 59, and I discovered that our financial situation was much more precarious than I had realized. He'd been a wonderful man and a loving father, but he wasn't particularly good with money. I had a choice. I could trust someone else to handle my finances and hope for the best. Or I could educate myself and take control of my own future." She paused, looking out at the stained glass windows that cast colored light across the sanctuary. It was terrifying at first. I'd never even balanced a checkbook, let alone researched investments. But I started reading everything I could get my hands on. I took classes at the community college. I joined investment clubs and online forums. Most importantly, I connected with other women who were on the same journey.
"Is that how this group started?" I asked. "Partly. We were all members of St. Margaret's, and we all found ourselves in situations where we needed to take charge of our own financial futures. Some of us were widows, some were divorced, and some were married to men who weren't as financially savvy as they believed themselves to be." She looked at me meaningfully. "We decided to pool our knowledge and support each other." The other women began arriving for the meeting, and our conversation was interrupted. But Eleanor's words stayed with me throughout our discussion of the book we were reading. When the formal meeting ended and the other women began clearing away coffee cups and folding chairs, Eleanor invited me to stay. "Ladies," she announced, "Catherine has expressed interest in learning about our investment discussions. Would you be comfortable sharing some of your experiences with her?" The unanimous enthusiasm of their response surprised me. I'd expected them to be protective of their financial information, but instead, they seemed genuinely excited to share what they'd learned. Margaret was the first to speak. "Catherine, when I was your age, I thought investing was only for wealthy men in expensive suits. I had no idea that ordinary people like us could build substantial wealth through careful planning and patience." "The key word is patience," Dolores added. "We're not day traders or speculators. We research companies and industries, invest in what we understand, and hold our positions for years, sometimes decades." Patty nodded in agreement. "And we diversify across different types of investments: stocks, bonds, real estate, even some alternative investments like the startup Eleanor mentioned." Rose pulled out a thick binder and set it on the table. "We keep detailed records of everything: our research, our decisions, our results. This helps us learn from both our successes and our mistakes." Helen leaned forward with the enthusiasm of a teacher who loved her subject.
But it's not just about the money, dear. Learning to manage your own finances gives you a sense of control and confidence that affects every area of your life. Joyce smiled warmly. And the best part is that we do it together. When one of us finds an interesting opportunity, we all research it and discuss it together. When someone makes a mistake, we all learn from it. We've become better investors by working as a team. Eleanor opened her portfolio and spread several documents across the table. Catherine, these are some of the resources we use: investment research platforms, financial planning calculators, educational websites. Would you like to see how we approach evaluating potential investments? For the next 2 hours, I received an intensive education in personal finance and investment strategy. These women walked me through their research methods, showed me how they analyzed companies and market trends, and explained concepts I'd never encountered. They spoke with the fluency of professionals, but they translated complex ideas into language I could understand. What amazed me most was their systematic approach to everything. They didn't make impulsive decisions or chase hot tips. Instead, they spent weeks or months researching potential investments, discussing them thoroughly, and making decisions based on careful analysis. They had clear goals, written plans, and regular review processes. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself thinking about my own financial situation with growing unease. James's approach of, "We're fine, trust me," seemed increasingly inadequate compared to the detailed planning these women had done. When I finally left the church that afternoon, my head was spinning with new information and uncomfortable realizations. I had 3 pages of notes, a reading list, and a growing awareness of how little I actually knew about our financial future. That evening, I tried again to engage James in a detailed conversation about our retirement planning. This time, I was more specific about what I wanted to know. "James, I need to understand exactly how much money we have and how long it will last. Can you show me our account statements and walk me through your calculations?" His reaction was more defensive than I had expected. "Kathy, what's gotten into you? We've never needed to discuss this level of detail before. Why are you suddenly questioning everything?" "I'm not questioning your abilities," I said, though I was beginning to wonder if I should be. "I just want to understand our situation better. I want to be involved in planning our future." "Those church ladies have been filling your head with nonsense. They probably read some article about women needing to take control of their finances, and now they think they're investment experts." His tone made me angry in a way that surprised me. These women have been successfully managing their own investments for over 15 years. They've built impressive portfolios and achieved financial independence. Maybe we could learn something from them. James scoffed.
Financial independence? Kathy, they're retired church ladies. How much money could they possibly have? That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I told him about Eleanor's recent investment success, about the sophisticated discussions I'd witnessed, about the systematic approach these women took to building wealth. James's reaction was immediate and harsh. "You're being ridiculous. No group of old ladies sitting around a church basement has made millions of dollars investing. They're either lying to impress you, or they're deluded, or you misunderstood what they were saying." The conversation escalated from there, with James becoming increasingly dismissive and me becoming increasingly frustrated. It ended with him storming out to his workshop and me sitting alone in our living room, feeling more isolated than I had since before I joined the church group. But his reaction had clarified something important for me. Whether James wanted to accept it or not, I needed to understand our financial situation myself. I could no longer afford to remain ignorant about something so fundamental to our future security. The next morning, while James was out running errands, I did something I'd never done before. I gathered all of our financial statements and account information and spread them across the dining room table. Then I called Eleanor. "I hope I'm not bothering you," I said when she answered, "but I could use some help understanding our financial situation. James isn't very interested in explaining the details, and I'm starting to worry that I don't know enough about our own money." "Catherine," Eleanor said warmly, "you're not bothering me at all. In fact, I've been hoping you would call. Would you like me to come over and help you review everything? An hour later, Eleanor sat at my dining room table with a legal pad and calculator, carefully reviewing our account statements and financial documents. She asked thoughtful questions and made notes, but her expression grew increasingly concerned as we went through everything. Finally, she set down her pen and looked at me with gentle honesty. Catherine, I need to share some concerns with you. Based on what I'm seeing here, your retirement savings may not be sufficient to maintain your current lifestyle throughout your retirement years. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Well, let's look at the numbers. You and James have about $300,000 in retirement accounts, correct? I nodded, feeling proud of what had always seemed like a substantial amount. And you own your home, which is worth approximately $400,000 based on recent comparable sales in your neighborhood. That also seemed positive to me. The conventional wisdom is that you can safely withdraw about 4% of your retirement savings annually without running out of money. 4% of $300,000 is $12,000 per year or $1,000 a month. The number hit me like a physical blow. $1,000 a month? But our expenses are much higher than that. Exactly. Your monthly expenses, based on the budget James showed you, are approximately $4,000. Even if we add in Social Security benefits, you're looking at a significant shortfall every month. I felt dizzy as the implications sank in. But James said we'd be fine. He said he had calculated everything. Eleanor's expression was sympathetic but serious. Catherine, it's possible that James believes you'll be fine because he's counting on selling the house to fund your retirement. But that creates its own problems. Where would you live? And what happens if the real estate market declines? We spent the next hour going through various scenarios, and none of them were reassuring. If we stayed in our current house, we'd run out of money within 10 years. If we sold the house and moved somewhere cheaper, we might stretch our savings to 15 years. But given that people our age could easily live another 25 or 30 years, neither option provided true security. What should I do? I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of the problem. Eleanor smiled encouragingly. The first thing to remember is that you're 58 years old. You have time to improve your situation if you start taking action now. The second thing is that you don't have to figure this out alone. There are strategies we can explore, and there are people who can help you. She spent the rest of the afternoon explaining various options. We could work longer and save more aggressively. We could invest more strategically to try to achieve better returns. We could consider downsizing our lifestyle to reduce our expenses. We could explore part-time work during retirement to supplement our savings. But the most important thing, Eleanor emphasized, is that you and James need to have an honest conversation about your situation and work together to address it.
Financial planning isn't something you can do effectively if one spouse is excluded from the process. That evening, armed with Eleanor's analysis and a much clearer understanding of our situation, I approached James again. This time, I didn't ask for information, I presented what I'd learned. James, we need to talk. I've reviewed our financial statements with someone who understands retirement planning, and we have a problem. His initial reaction was anger at my going behind his back. But as I laid out the numbers and the various scenarios Eleanor had shown me, his defensiveness gradually gave way to concern. "Are you saying we don't have enough money?" he asked finally. "I'm saying that based on our current savings and expenses, we'll run out of money long before we die. We need to make some significant changes if we want to have a secure retirement." The conversation was difficult and emotional. James was forced to confront the fact that his financial planning had been inadequate, while I had to acknowledge that my previous willingness to remain ignorant about our finances had contributed to the problem. But by the end of the evening, we had agreed on several important things. We would both educate ourselves about financial planning and investment strategies. We would consult with a fee-only financial advisor to get professional guidance, and we would work together to develop a more comprehensive plan for our retirement. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into learning everything I could about personal finance. I read books, attended seminars, and spent hours online researching investment strategies. Most importantly, I became a regular participant in my church group's investment discussions. The women welcomed me into their circle with genuine enthusiasm, sharing their knowledge freely and encouraging my questions. They helped me understand different types of investments, taught me how to research companies and analyze financial statements, and showed me how to build a diversified portfolio. What I discovered was that investing wasn't nearly as complicated or risky as I'd believed. The key was education, patience, and discipline. By learning to evaluate investments systematically and by maintaining a long-term perspective, ordinary people could indeed build substantial wealth over time. More importantly, I learned that taking control of my financial future wasn't just about money. It was about empowerment. For the first time in my adult life, I understood where my money was and how it was working for me. I could make informed decisions about our financial future instead of simply hoping that someone else had made the right choices on my behalf. James, meanwhile, was struggling with the transition. As an accountant, he was used to being the financial expert in our relationship. Having his wife suddenly become more knowledgeable about investments than he was challenged his sense of identity and competence. Our relationship went through a difficult period as we both adjusted to this new dynamic. There were arguments about investment choices, disagreements about risk tolerance, and tension around who would make which financial decisions. But gradually, we learned to work together as partners, rather than operating in our traditional roles of expert and dependent. James brought his understanding of taxes and accounting principles to our planning, while I contributed the investment knowledge I was gaining from my church group. The transformation in our financial situation didn't happen overnight, but it was dramatic. By working with a fee-only financial advisor and implementing the strategies I'd learned from Eleanor and the other women, we were able to significantly improve our retirement prospects. We increased our savings rate, shifted our investments to a more growth-oriented strategy, and made plans to work several years longer than James had originally intended. We also downsized our lifestyle in some areas, using the money we saved to boost our retirement contributions. But perhaps the most significant change was in my relationship with money itself. Instead of viewing financial planning as a mysterious process that required expert knowledge I couldn't possibly understand, I learned to see it as a set of skills I could master with time and effort. The women in my church group became my mentors, teachers, and collaborators. We shared research, discussed investment opportunities, and supported each other through market volatility and personal challenges. What had started as a weekly book discussion had evolved into a sophisticated investment club that generated impressive returns for all of its members. 6 months after that first revelation about Eleanor's investment success, I had my own success story to share. Following the group's research and recommendations, I had invested in several opportunities that were showing strong performance. More importantly, I had developed the knowledge and confidence to evaluate investments independently. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family still referred to my church friends as fossils and broke old ladies, even as these same women were teaching me strategies that would transform our financial future. Rebecca and Derek remained convinced that I was wasting my time with a group of irrelevant elderly women, never suspecting that these women had more investment knowledge and financial success than most professional advisors. But their ignorance no longer bothered me the way it once had. I had learned something valuable about assumptions and stereotypes, about the danger of dismissing people based on their age, gender, or the settings in which we encounter them. The women in my church group weren't fossils or irrelevant elderly busybodies. They were intelligent, accomplished individuals who had taken control of their financial destinies and achieved remarkable success. They had welcomed me into their circle, shared their knowledge generously, and changed the trajectory of my life. As I prepared to share my own investment success with the group the following Thursday, I reflected on how much had changed in just 6 months. I was no longer the financially ignorant woman who had stumbled into that church basement looking for social connection. I had become an investor, a financial planner, and a partner in my own economic future. More than that, I had discovered a community of women who proved that age was no barrier to learning, growing, and achieving new levels of success. They had shown me that it was never too late to take control of your life and create the future you wanted. And the best part was, this was just the beginning. The weeks following my financial awakening felt like living in two completely different worlds. During the day, I inhabited the familiar routine of my suburban life, making grocery lists, doing laundry, and maintaining the comfortable domesticity that had defined my existence for decades. But every Thursday morning, I stepped into a parallel universe where women, who looked like typical grandmothers, discussed stock valuations, market trends, and investment strategies with the expertise of professionals. The transformation wasn't just intellectual, it was emotional. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely excited about something. I found myself staying up late reading financial reports and waking up early to check market openings. The Wall Street Journal, which had previously served as nothing more than Kindle for our fireplace, became essential reading. I subscribed to investment newsletters, joined online forums, and downloaded apps that tracked my growing portfolio.
She would arrive at our Thursday meetings with articles she'd printed specifically for me, companies she thought I should research, and questions designed to challenge my thinking. Under her guidance, I learned to read annual reports, understand price-to-earnings ratios, and evaluate a company's competitive position within its industry. The key, Eleanor explained during one of our extended conversations after a regular meeting, is to think like an owner, not a speculator. When you buy stock in a company, you're purchasing a piece of that business. You want to own businesses that generate consistent profits, have strong management, and operate in industries with good long-term prospects. Margaret had become my teacher in the art of international investing. Her background in technology and her connections to Asian markets provided insights I couldn't have gained anywhere else. She taught me about currency risks, geopolitical factors, and the opportunities available in emerging markets. Americans often overlook the rest of the world, she said with a slight smile during one particularly enlightening session. But some of the best investment opportunities are in countries that most people can't even locate on a map. The key is understanding the risks and doing your homework. Dolores specialized in what she called lifestyle investing, focusing on companies that produce products and services she understood and used. Her portfolio included everything from cosmetics companies to restaurant chains, and her investment philosophy was elegantly simple. Invest in businesses that serve human needs that aren't going away. I buy stock in companies that make products I actually use, she explained. If I love their products and I'm willing to pay for them, chances are other people feel the same way. It's not sophisticated, but it works. Rose brought a different perspective entirely. Her experience running her own small business had given her insight into the challenges facing entrepreneurs and small companies. She had developed a talent for identifying promising startups and small-cap stocks before they attracted mainstream attention. Big companies are safe, she said in her gentle Polish accent, but small companies can make you rich. The trick is learning to spot the difference between a company that's small because it's new and promising and one that's small because it's failing. Helen's strength lay in her understanding of economic cycles and market history. She had lived through multiple recessions, market crashes, and periods of both inflation and deflation. Her perspective helped ground our discussions in reality and prevented us from getting caught up in short-term market movements. Markets go up and markets go down, she would remind us whenever someone expressed concern about volatility. The question isn't whether there will be another crash, it's whether you're positioned to survive it and take advantage of the opportunities it creates. Joyce had developed expertise in real estate investment trusts and alternative investments. Her recent career change into real estate had given her access to information about property markets, development trends, and the various ways investors could profit from real estate without directly owning properties. Real estate has made more millionaires than any other investment, she would say,
But most people think the only way to invest in real estate is to buy rental properties. There are much easier ways to get exposure to real estate markets. Patty's contribution was perhaps the most valuable of all. She had an intuitive understanding of consumer trends and demographic shifts. Her investment choices reflected her ability to anticipate what products and services would be in demand as society changed. Follow the money, but more importantly, follow the people, was her favorite saying. Figure out what people will want 5 years from now, find companies positioned to give it to them, and buy their stock before everyone else figures it out. Each woman brought her unique perspective and expertise to our discussions, but what impressed me most was how they combined their individual insights into collective wisdom. They disagreed with each other regularly, but they did so respectfully and constructively. When one member recommended an investment, the others would research it independently and share their findings. Sometimes they reached consensus, sometimes they agreed to disagree, but every decision was made after thorough analysis and open discussion. The sophistication of their approach became clear to me during a particularly complex discussion about a biotech company that Patty had discovered. The company was developing treatments for Alzheimer's disease, and their experimental drug had shown promising results in early trials. The science looks compelling, Patty explained, spreading research papers across our usual table in the church basement. But biotech investments are incredibly risky. Most experimental drugs fail in later stage trials. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. What's their cash position? How long can they fund operations if this drug doesn't pan out? Margaret pulled up financial data on her tablet. They have enough cash for approximately 18 months of operations at their current burn rate, but they're also seeking partnerships with larger pharmaceutical companies. Rose leaned forward with interest. What's the total addressable market for Alzheimer's treatments? How many patients would benefit if the drug works? Helen looked up from the research paper she'd been studying. Based on demographic trends, the market for Alzheimer's treatments is going to grow significantly over the next 20 years, but the regulatory approval process is unpredictable. Joyce asked the practical question. What percentage of our portfolio would we be putting at risk? This sounds like the kind of investment where we could lose everything or make 10 times our money. Dolores had been quietly reading through clinical trial data. The side effect profile looks manageable, and the mechanism of action is different from previous failed approaches. But we're still talking about a company with no revenue and no approved products. The discussion continued for over an hour, with each woman contributing her expertise and perspective. They analyzed the company's management team, competitive position, intellectual property portfolio, and potential partnerships. They compared it to other biotech investments they'd made and considered how it would fit into their overall portfolio allocation. In the end, they decided to make a small investment, treating it as a speculative position that could potentially generate significant returns, but might also result in a total loss. The decision-making process was more thorough than anything I'd witnessed in professional settings, and it was being conducted by a group of women who were supposedly broke old ladies playing bingo. As I became more involved in their investment discussions, I began to understand the true scope of their success. Eleanor's portfolio had grown to over $8 million through careful investing in compound growth over 15 years.
Margaret had accumulated nearly $6 million, despite sending substantial amounts to support her elderly mother in Taiwan. Dolores owned rental properties worth over $2 million, in addition to her investment portfolio. Rose's small catering business had evolved into a food service company that supplied several local restaurants, generating passive income that supplemented her investment returns. Helen had used her investment gains to set up trust funds for her grandchildren's education. Joyce's real estate investments had performed so well that she'd been able to retire early from her previous career. Patty had perhaps the most impressive story of all. She'd started with less than $50,000 in savings when she joined the group 12 years earlier. Through disciplined investing and the compound growth of her returns, she'd built a portfolio worth over $3 million while maintaining her modest lifestyle. These weren't inherited fortunes or lucky lottery winnings. These women had built substantial wealth through knowledge, discipline, and patience. They'd educated themselves about investing, made careful decisions, and stuck to their strategies through multiple market cycles. Yet somehow,
The broader world continued to see them as irrelevant elderly women whose opinions didn't matter. The disconnect was so profound that I began to question everything I thought I knew about aging, gender, and social perceptions. My own portfolio was growing rapidly as I applied what I was learning. My first investment, a technology company that Eleanor had recommended, gained 30% in value within 3 months. A healthcare stock that Margaret had researched generated consistent dividend income while steadily appreciating in price. A real estate investment trust that Joyce had suggested provided both current income and long-term growth potential. But more than the financial gains, I was experiencing something I hadn't felt in years: intellectual stimulation and personal growth. Learning about investing had opened up entire worlds of knowledge I'd never explored. I found myself reading about economics, business strategy, technological innovation, and global markets. I was developing opinions about monetary policy, international trade, and corporate governance. James was struggling to adjust to this new version of his wife. Our dinner conversations, which had previously focused on family news and local events, now included discussions of Federal Reserve policy and emerging market currencies. I would share insights from my research or excitement about potential investment opportunities, only to see his eyes glaze over or his expression turn skeptical. "Catherine, you're becoming obsessed," he said one evening after I'd spent 20 minutes explaining why I thought renewable energy stocks were positioned for significant growth. "All you talk about anymore is the stock market." His criticism stung because it contained a grain of truth. I was passionate about investing in a way that surprised even me. But his dismissive tone reminded me of how he'd initially reacted to my church group's expertise. "I'm not obsessed. I'm engaged. For the first time in years, I'm learning new things and challenging myself intellectually. I thought you'd be happy that I found something I'm passionate about." "I'd be happier if your passion was something normal, like gardening or volunteering. This whole investment thing is making you different. You're not the woman I married." The comment hit me harder than he'd probably intended. He was right that I was changing, but I couldn't understand why he saw that as a negative development. The woman he'd married had been financially dependent, intellectually passive, and professionally stagnant. The woman I was becoming was knowledgeable, confident, and actively engaged in planning our future. The tension between us came to a head during a conversation about our revised retirement strategy. Based on what I'd learned from the church group and our fee-only financial advisor, we'd developed a more aggressive investment approach designed to help us catch up for lost time. "I've been thinking about the biotech stock the group discussed," I said over breakfast one Saturday morning. "I'd like to invest $5,000 in it." James set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. "Absolutely not. We're not gambling our retirement money on some experimental drug company." "It's not gambling," I said patiently. "It's a calculated risk based on thorough research. We've analyzed the company's fundamentals, the market opportunity, and the competitive landscape." "We," James's voice rose slightly, "Catherine, we don't know anything about biotech companies. You've been reading some articles and talking to your church friends, but that doesn't make you qualified to evaluate pharmaceutical investments." His words triggered a flash of anger that surprised me. Those church friends have outperformed professional fund managers for over a decade. Their research process is more thorough than most investment firms. Maybe instead of dismissing their expertise, you should try to learn from it. "They're amateurs playing with monopoly money," James said dismissively. "Real investing requires professional training and experience." "Professional training like yours?" I asked pointedly, "because your professional training led us to keep all our money in savings accounts that don't even keep pace with inflation." The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with James storming out and me sitting alone in our kitchen, wondering how my marriage had become a battleground over investment philosophy.
But I refused to back down. That afternoon, I called Eleanor and asked if I could meet with her privately. We arranged to have coffee at a quiet restaurant where we could talk without interruption. "I need some advice," I said after we'd ordered.
James is threatened by my interest in investing, and it's causing problems in our marriage. But I can't go back to being the financially ignorant woman I was 6 months ago. Eleanor listened thoughtfully as I described our recent conflicts. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment before responding. Catherine, what you're experiencing is more common than you might think. When one spouse begins to change and grow, it can threaten the existing balance in a relationship. James is probably feeling like he's losing control and authority in an area where he's always been the expert. So what do I do? I asked. Give up everything I've learned to preserve domestic peace? Not at all, Eleanor said firmly. But you might need to find ways to include him in your journey instead of leaving him behind. Men often respond better to collaboration than to being presented with accomplished facts. She suggested that I invite James to attend one of our Thursday meetings as an observer. Let him see firsthand what we do and how we do it. Once he understands that we're not a group of reckless speculators, he might be more receptive to your involvement. The idea made me nervous. James's presence would change the dynamic of our group, and I wasn't sure how the other women would react to having their private discussions observed by a skeptical husband. But when I broached the idea with the group the following Thursday, their response was enthusiastic. "Bring him," Margaret said with a grin. "We've dealt with skeptical spouses before. Most of them become converts once they see our track records." Dolores nodded in agreement. "My late husband was convinced I was going to lose all our money until he saw the returns I was generating. Then he wanted to know why he hadn't learned about investing sooner." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Catherine, your husband is welcome anytime. We're proud of what we've accomplished, and we're happy to share our knowledge with anyone who's genuinely interested in learning." Convincing James to attend took several days of negotiation. He was reluctant to spend his Thursday morning sitting in a church basement listening to a bunch of old ladies talk about stocks, but he finally agreed after I promised to stop bringing up investment topics at home if he would give the group a fair chance. The Thursday morning James attended turned out to be one of our most impressive meetings. Eleanor had prepared a presentation showing the group's collective returns over the past 5 years, complete with charts comparing their performance to major market indices and professional fund managers. The results were undeniable. These women had consistently outperformed the market while taking on less risk than many professional investors. Margaret shared her analysis of a semiconductor company that had generated over 200% returns for group members who had invested 2 years earlier. She walked through her research process, explaining how she'd identified the company's competitive advantages and growth potential before the broader market recognized its value. Rose presented her latest discovery, a small restaurant chain that was expanding rapidly into underserved markets. Her analysis included site visits to multiple locations, interviews with management, and detailed financial projections. The thoroughness of her research would have impressed any professional analyst. Joyce discussed her real estate investments, showing how she'd used REITs and real estate development funds to generate steady income while participating in property appreciation. Her portfolio included exposure to everything from shopping centers to data centers, providing diversification across different types of real estate. Helen shared her thoughts on macroeconomic trends and their potential impact on various investment sectors. Her historical perspective helped the group understand how current events fit into broader economic cycles. Patty concluded the meeting with a discussion of demographic trends and their investment implications. She'd identified several companies positioned to benefit from the aging of the baby boom generation, the growing influence of millennials, and the increasing diversity of the American population. Throughout the meeting, I watched James's expression change from skepticism to surprise to grudging respect. These women weren't the amateurs he'd expected to find. They were knowledgeable, disciplined investors who approached their decisions with the kind of rigor he associated with professional investment managers. After the meeting, several of the women made a point of engaging James in conversation. They asked about his background in accounting and sought his perspective on tax implications of various investment strategies. They treated him as a valued contributor rather than a skeptical observer, and he responded by becoming more engaged and asking more substantive questions.
On the drive home, James was unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Those women know what they're doing. Their research is more thorough than anything I've seen from the financial advisors at my firm." I felt a mixture of vindication and relief. "So you understand why I've been so excited about learning from them?" "I do. And I understand why I've been frustrated with your attitude. I was wrong to dismiss their expertise based on my assumptions about church ladies." The conversation that followed was the most honest discussion we'd had about money, investing, and our future since we'd gotten married. James acknowledged that his conservative approach to financial planning had been based more on fear than on careful analysis. I admitted that my enthusiasm for investing had sometimes made me dismissive of his concerns about risk. We agreed to work together going forward, combining his accounting expertise with my developing investment knowledge. James would handle the tax planning and record-keeping aspects of our portfolio, while I would focus on research and investment selection. More importantly, we agreed that I would continue participating in the church group's investment discussions. James had seen firsthand the value of their collective wisdom, and he no longer viewed my involvement as a threat to his authority or our financial security. The transformation in our relationship was immediate and profound.
Instead of arguing about investment decisions, we began collaborating on them. James would review the tax implications of potential purchases, while I researched the companies and industries. We would discuss our options over dinner, weighing risks and opportunities together. Our revised approach to retirement planning became more aggressive and sophisticated. We increased our savings rate, shifted more of our portfolio into growth investments, and began exploring alternative investments like REITs and international funds. We also made plans to work several additional years, using the extra time to maximize our Social Security benefits and continue building our nest egg. But perhaps the most significant change was in how we viewed our future. Instead of seeing retirement as a period of gradual decline supported by dwindling resources, we began to envision it as an opportunity for continued growth and new experiences. With a properly managed investment portfolio, we could potentially afford to travel, pursue new interests, and support causes we cared about. The success of James's visit to our group led to an unexpected development. Several other spouses began asking to attend meetings. Margaret's husband, David, a retired engineer, became fascinated by the technical analysis aspects of stock research. Dolores' son, Michael, who worked in marketing, provided insights into consumer behavior that enhanced the group's investment decisions. Eleanor suggested that we formalize our arrangement by creating an actual investment club with official membership and written guidelines. The idea appealed to everyone, and within a month, we had established the St. Margaret's Investment Society with 12 members, including 4 spouses. The expansion of our group brought new perspectives and expertise. David's engineering background helped us evaluate technology companies and infrastructure investments. Michael's marketing experience provided insights into brand value and consumer trends. A new member, Janet Phillips, brought experience in healthcare administration that proved invaluable when analyzing pharmaceutical and medical device companies. But the core philosophy remained the same: thorough research, long-term thinking, and collaborative decision-making. New members were expected to contribute research and analysis, not just follow the recommendations of more experienced investors. My role within the group evolved as well. I became the unofficial coordinator of our educational activities, organizing speakers, arranging field trips to company headquarters, and maintaining our research library. Eleanor had recognized my organizational skills and enthusiasm for learning, and she encouraged me to take on leadership responsibilities. The recognition felt wonderful, but it also highlighted how much my life had changed in less than a year. I'd gone from being a passive recipient of other people's financial decisions to being an active leader in investment research and education. I was developing expertise that people valued and sought out. More importantly, I was discovering aspects of myself that had been dormant for decades. I had a talent for financial analysis that I'd never known existed. I enjoyed the intellectual challenge of evaluating businesses and predicting market trends. I was good at explaining complex concepts in ways that others could understand. These discoveries led to an unexpected opportunity. Janet Phillips mentioned during one of our meetings that the community college where she taught part-time was looking for someone to develop a course on personal finance and investing for older adults. "You should apply," she said to me after a particularly engaging discussion about retirement planning strategies. "You have a gift for making complex topics accessible, and your enthusiasm is contagious." The idea terrified and excited me in equal measure. I'd never considered teaching, and the thought of standing in front of a classroom of strangers felt overwhelming. But Janet's suggestion planted a seed that began to grow. I discussed the opportunity with Eleanor, who was immediately encouraging. "Catherine, you've learned more about investing in 1 year than most people learn in a lifetime. And you've done it while helping your husband overcome his resistance to change and encouraging other spouses to get involved. You have exactly the skills needed to help other people take control of their financial futures." James's reaction surprised me. Instead of expressing concern about my taking on new responsibilities, he was enthusiastic about the opportunity. "You should do it," he said when I told him about Janet's suggestion. "You've transformed our financial situation and our marriage by learning about investing. Imagine how many other couples you could help." His support gave me the confidence to pursue the opportunity seriously. I contacted the community college and learned that they were indeed interested in developing a course for older adults who wanted to learn about personal finance and investing. The curriculum development process took several months, but it allowed me to synthesize everything I'd learned from Eleanor and the other women into a coherent educational program. I created modules on basic investment principles, risk assessment, portfolio diversification, retirement planning, and estate planning. But I also included elements that reflected what I'd learned about the social and psychological aspects of financial planning. I designed exercises to help couples communicate more effectively about money. I created materials to help people overcome common misconceptions about investing. I developed strategies for building confidence in financial decision-making. The first class I taught was small, with only 8 students ranging in age from 55 to 72. But their enthusiasm and engagement reminded me of my own excitement when I'd first started learning about investing. Over the course of 12 weeks, I watched these students undergo the same transformation I'd experienced. They arrived as financially passive individuals who believed investing was too complicated or risky for ordinary people. They graduated as confident, knowledgeable investors who understood how to research companies, evaluate risks, and build diversified portfolios. More importantly, they developed the same sense of empowerment and control that I'd gained from my involvement with the St. Margaret's Investment Society. They learned that financial planning wasn't a mysterious process that required expert knowledge they couldn't possibly understand. It was a set of skills they could master with time, effort, and proper guidance. The success of that first class led to additional opportunities. The community college asked me to develop an advanced course for graduates of the basic program. A local senior center invited me to present workshops on retirement planning. A women's professional organization asked me to speak about investment strategies for women approaching retirement. Each speaking engagement reinforced my growing reputation as an expert on personal finance and investing. People began seeking my advice on investment decisions, retirement planning strategies, and portfolio management. I was invited to join the boards of 2 nonprofit organizations that needed help with endowment management. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was being recognized as a financial expert based on knowledge I'd gained from a group of women my own family continued to dismiss as irrelevant fossils. Rebecca and Derek still made jokes about my church lady friends whenever the topic came up, apparently unaware that these same women had taught me skills that were transforming not just my own life, but the lives of dozens of other people. But their ignorance no longer bothered me. I'd learned to value substance over appearances, expertise over assumptions, and results over stereotypes. The women who met every Thursday morning in the basement of St. Margaret's Episcopal Church were some of the most accomplished investors I'd ever encountered, regardless of their age, gender, or choice of meeting venue. As I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point, I realized that my transformation had been about much more than learning to invest money. I discovered capabilities I didn't know I possessed, developed confidence I'd never felt before, and found purpose in helping others achieve their own financial goals. The woman who had stumbled into that church basement looking for social connection had evolved into someone who was sought out for her expertise and leadership. I'd gone from being financially dependent to being financially independent, from being intellectually passive to being actively engaged in continuous learning. Most importantly, I'd learned that it was never too late to reinvent yourself, to acquire new skills, or to discover hidden talents. The assumptions I'd made about aging, about appropriate behavior for women of my generation, and about the limitations of my own potential had all proven to be false. The future that had once seemed predictable and constrained now felt full of possibilities. With a growing investment portfolio, an expanding teaching career, and a marriage that had been strengthened by our shared commitment to financial planning, I was excited about what lay ahead. The journey was far from over, but I knew I was equipped with the knowledge, skills, and confidence needed to navigate whatever challenges and opportunities awaited. And I knew I had the support of a remarkable group of women who had proven that wisdom, determination, and collaborative effort could overcome any obstacle. The fossils, as it turned out, were very much alive and thriving. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in late October, just as James and I were settling in to review our quarterly investment statements. The caller ID showed Rebecca's number, which wasn't unusual, but her tone when I answered was sharper than normal. "Mom, we need to talk. Derek and I are coming over tomorrow night." Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. "Is everything all right? Are the kids okay?" "The kids are fine, but we're concerned about you, about some things we've been hearing." I glanced at James, who had looked up from his papers with a frown. "What kinds of things?" "We'll discuss it tomorrow, 7 o'clock. She hung up before I could ask any more questions. James set down his reading glasses and looked at me with concern. "What was that about?" "I'm not sure, but it didn't sound good." I replayed the conversation in my mind, trying to identify what might have prompted such an ominous call. She said they'd been hearing things about me. The next 24 hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. I found myself second-guessing every recent interaction, every conversation, every decision. Had I said something inappropriate during my last teaching engagement? Had one of my investment recommendations gone badly? Had someone complained about the community college course? By the time Rebecca and Derek arrived Wednesday evening, I'd worked myself into a state of nervous anticipation that made it difficult to concentrate on anything else. They came through the front door with the kind of serious expressions usually reserved for family emergencies or bad medical news. "Mom, Dad, we need to sit down and have a serious conversation," Rebecca said without preamble, settling herself on the living room sofa with the kind of authority she'd developed in her corporate communications job. Derek remained standing, his arms crossed in a way that suggested he was prepared for conflict. At 36, he'd always been somewhat condescending toward both James and me, but tonight his attitude seemed particularly pronounced. "We've been hearing some disturbing reports about Mom's recent activities," Rebecca began, her tone taking on the tone she used for difficult client presentations. "Apparently, she's been positioning herself as some kind of investment expert and giving financial advice to people who don't know any better." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Positioning myself? I teach basic financial literacy at the community college. I help people understand fundamental investment concepts. Derek snorted dismissively. "Come on, Catherine. You're not qualified to teach anyone about investing. You didn't even know what a stock was 2 years ago." "That's not true," I said, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. "I've been learning about financial planning and investment strategies for over a year. I've taken courses, done extensive research, and worked with qualified professionals." Rebecca pulled out her phone and consulted what appeared to be notes. "Mom, we've heard that you've been encouraging elderly people to put their life savings into risky investments, that you've been promoting some kind of investment club that's basically a pyramid scheme." The words were so far from reality that I couldn't immediately formulate a response. The St. Margaret's Investment Society was many things, but a pyramid scheme was not one of them. We were a group of individuals who pooled research and shared investment ideas, with each member making independent decisions about their own money. Who told you this? I asked, my voice sharper than I had intended.
Derek exchanged a glance with Rebecca before answering. That's not important. What matters is that you're getting in over your head and potentially taking other people down with you. James finally spoke up, his accountant's instincts kicking in. What specific evidence do you have to support these accusations? Because from what I've seen, your mother has developed genuine expertise in financial planning. Rebecca's expression suggested that James had disappointed her as much as I had. Dad, you're supposed to be protecting Mom from making poor decisions, not enabling her to give bad advice to vulnerable people. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Rebecca and Derek presenting their concerns in prosecutorial detail. According to their sources, I was operating an unregistered investment advisory service, encouraging people to make speculative investments and claiming credentials I didn't possess. Every attempt I made to explain the reality of my teaching and the investment society was met with skepticism or outright dismissal. When I mentioned the success of my students and the positive feedback I'd received, Derek suggested that I was being manipulated by people who were too polite to express their real concerns. When I described the investment society's research process and track record, Rebecca implied that I was either lying about our returns or had been deceived by more sophisticated scammers. Most painful was their complete dismissal of the women who had become my mentors and friends. Eleanor was described as a manipulative old woman who was probably running some kind of confidence game. Margaret, Dolores, Rose, Helen, Joyce, and Patty were characterized as either co-conspirators or fellow victims. Mom, these church ladies have convinced you that you're some kind of financial genius, Rebecca said with exasperated patience. But you're not. You're a retired school administrator who's been taken in by a group of con artists. The assault on my competence and judgment was relentless. According to Rebecca and Derek, I lacked the education, experience, and intellectual capacity to understand investment strategies. My success in teaching was attributed to luck and the politeness of my students. My involvement with the investment society was evidence of my naivete and susceptibility to manipulation. By the time they left that evening, I felt completely deflated. Their certainty about my incompetence had shaken my confidence in ways I hadn't experienced since my early days of learning about investing. For the first time in months, I found myself questioning whether I really understood what I was doing, or whether I'd been fooling myself about my abilities. James was furious about the confrontation, but his anger was directed at Rebecca and Derek rather than at me. They had no right to come in here and attack you like that, he said after they'd left, especially when they don't have any actual evidence to support their claims. But what if they're right? I asked, sinking into my favorite chair with exhaustion. What if I have been getting in over my head? What if I really don't know what I'm doing? James sat down across from me and took my hands in his. Catherine, I've seen your research. I've watched you analyze companies and evaluate investment opportunities. I've witnessed the results you've achieved with our own portfolio. You're not some amateur who's been fooled by con artists. His support meant everything to me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe Rebecca and Derek had seen something I'd missed. Maybe my enthusiasm for investing had blinded me to my own limitations. Maybe I really was just a retired school administrator playing at being a financial expert. The next morning, I called Eleanor and asked if I could meet with her privately. I needed someone with genuine expertise to give me an honest assessment of my knowledge and abilities. We met at the same quiet restaurant where we'd had our conversation about James's initial resistance to my investing interests. This time, however, I was the one seeking reassurance and guidance. Eleanor, I need you to be completely honest with me, I said after describing the previous evening's confrontation. Am I qualified to teach personal finance? Do I really understand investing well enough to help other people with their financial decisions? Eleanor listened to my concerns with the kind of patient attention she'd always shown, but her response was more direct than I had expected. Catherine, let me ask you a question. When you were a school administrator,
Did you consider yourself qualified for that role? The question caught me off guard. Of course, I had the education, training, and experience required for the position. And how did you acquire that education, training, and experience? Through formal study, professional development, and years of practical application. Eleanor smiled. And how is your financial education any different? You've studied extensively, sought out professional development opportunities, and applied what you've learned with measurable success. The only difference is that your daughter doesn't recognize financial education as legitimate when it doesn't come from traditional institutional sources. She pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed she was carrying. I brought something that might help put things in perspective. The folder contained documentation of my education and achievements over the past year and a half, certificates from courses I'd completed, transcripts from seminars I'd attended, letters of recommendation from my community college supervisors, and testimonials from students who had benefited from my teaching. This represents more financial education than most people receive in a lifetime, Eleanor said, spreading the documents across the table. You've completed coursework equivalent to a minor in finance, attended professional development seminars that many financial advisors never pursue, and demonstrated your knowledge through successful teaching and practical application. The only difference is that your daughter doesn't recognize financial education as legitimate when it doesn't come from traditional institutional sources. The documentation was impressive when laid out comprehensively, but I still felt uncertain. But I don't have a degree in finance or economics.
I'm not a licensed financial advisor. Neither are most successful individual investors, Eleanor pointed out. Warren Buffett doesn't have a finance degree. Peter Lynch was an English major. Some of the most successful investors in history were self-taught individuals who developed their expertise through study and experience. She leaned forward with the intensity I'd come to associate with her most important lessons. Catherine, what your daughter and son-in-law don't understand is that financial literacy isn't rocket science. It's a set of principles and practices that any intelligent person can master with sufficient effort. You've put in that effort, and you've achieved the results to prove it. Her confidence in my abilities was reassuring, but I still felt the need for additional validation. Over the following weeks, I sought out feedback from multiple sources about my teaching and investment knowledge. Dr. Patricia Summers, the community college dean who had initially hired me, provided a glowing assessment of my teaching effectiveness and student outcomes. Your courses have some of the highest satisfaction ratings we've ever recorded, she told me during a formal evaluation meeting. Students consistently report that you've helped them gain confidence and knowledge that has improved their financial situations. Michael Rodriguez, the fee-only financial advisor who had been working with James and me, offered his professional perspective on my expertise. Your understanding of investment principles is quite sophisticated, he said when I asked for his honest assessment. You ask intelligent questions, grasp complex concepts quickly, and apply knowledge effectively. Many of my clients would benefit from having your level of financial literacy. Even Janet Phillips, who had initially suggested I apply for the teaching position, weighed in with her observations. You have a rare combination of technical knowledge and communication skills, she said. You can break down complex topics into understandable components without oversimplifying or talking down to your audience. The feedback from my students was perhaps the most meaningful validation of all. During the next few weeks, I received calls and emails from people whose lives had been changed by what they'd learned in my courses. Martha Henderson, a 70-year-old widow, called to tell me that the investment strategies she'd learned had allowed her to stop worrying about running out of money during retirement. Before your class, I was keeping everything in savings accounts because I was afraid of losing money, she said. Now I have a diversified portfolio that's growing steadily, and I finally feel secure about my future. Robert Chen, a 58-year-old engineer approaching retirement, sent an email describing how my course had helped him and his wife develop a comprehensive retirement plan. We were on track to work until we were 75 because we didn't understand how to make our money work for us, he wrote. Thanks to what we learned from you, we'll be able to retire comfortably at 65. These testimonials provided powerful evidence that my teaching was making a real difference in people's lives. But the validation that meant the most came from an unexpected source, a financial advisor who had initially been skeptical of my qualifications. Linda Garrett was a CFP with over 20 years of experience who had attended one of my workshops at the Senior Center. She'd approached me afterward with what seemed like professional courtesy, but her follow-up call suggested genuine respect for my expertise. I have to admit, I was prepared to be critical of your presentation. I've seen too many unqualified people offering financial advice to vulnerable populations. But your content was accurate, comprehensive, and appropriately nuanced. You covered concepts that many of my colleagues don't fully understand. She went on to offer something I hadn't expected, a professional collaboration. I've been looking for someone to teach basic financial literacy to my clients' adult children. Most of them need education before they're ready for professional financial planning services. Would you be interested in developing a curriculum for that population? The offer was both flattering and validating. A licensed professional with decades of experience was seeking my expertise and trusting me to educate her clients' families. It was clear evidence that my knowledge and teaching abilities were recognized by someone with credentials that even Rebecca and Derek would have to respect. Armed with this professional validation, I decided to address my family's concerns more directly. I called Rebecca and asked her to meet with me for lunch, without Derek, so we could have a more productive conversation about my activities. She agreed reluctantly, and we met at a restaurant near her office the following Tuesday. I came prepared with documentation of my education, teaching qualifications, and professional recognition. Rebecca, I understand your concerns about my involvement in financial education, but I think you've been given some inaccurate information about what I actually do. I walked her through my curriculum, showed her my student evaluations, and explained the rigorous research process used by the Investment Society. I provided evidence of my educational background and professional development, and I shared testimonials from students whose financial situations had improved as a result of what they'd learned in my courses. Rebecca listened politely, but her expression remained skeptical throughout my presentation. When I finished, she was quiet for several minutes before responding. Mom, I'm sure you mean well, and I'm glad your students seem happy with your classes, but that doesn't change the fact that you're not really qualified to be giving people financial advice. Her persistence in dismissing my qualifications, despite the evidence I'd presented, was both frustrating and enlightening. I realized that her objections weren't based on my actual knowledge or achievements, but on her preconceptions about what constituted legitimate expertise. What would qualify me, in your opinion? I asked directly. A degree in finance or economics, certification as a financial planner, employment with a recognized financial services firm. So Warren Buffett isn't qualified to give investment advice? I asked pointedly. Rebecca looked confused. That's different. He's Warren Buffett.
But he doesn't have a finance degree. He was an economics major who learned about investing through study and practice, just like I did. Mom, you're not Warren Buffett. The circular logic of her argument was becoming clear. She wouldn't accept my expertise because I wasn't already recognized as an expert, but she wouldn't recognize my expertise because it hadn't been acquired through traditional channels. More troubling was her apparent belief that age and gender disqualified me from financial expertise regardless of my actual knowledge or achievements. She seemed unable to imagine that a 60-year-old woman could develop sophisticated investment skills or teach others effectively. Rebecca, what exactly are you afraid will happen if I continue teaching and investing? I asked. Her answer revealed the depth of her misconceptions. I'm afraid you'll lose your retirement money on risky investments. I'm afraid you'll give bad advice that costs other people their savings. I'm afraid you'll be sued or face legal consequences for operating without proper licensing. Each of her fears was based on false assumptions about what I was doing. I wasn't gambling with our retirement money. I was building a diversified portfolio based on careful research. I wasn't giving specific investment advice. I was teaching general principles and encouraging people to make their own informed decisions. I wasn't operating as a licensed financial advisor. I was providing education within the clear legal boundaries that governed financial literacy instruction. But explaining these distinctions to Rebecca proved futile. She'd already formed her conclusions, and no amount of evidence seemed capable of changing her mind. The lunch ended with Rebecca agreeing to think about what I'd shared with her, but her tone suggested that her thinking was unlikely to result in a change of perspective. Driving home from that frustrating conversation, I realized that I was facing a choice that went beyond family dynamics. I could scale back my involvement in financial education to appease Rebecca's concerns, or I could continue pursuing something that had become central to my sense of purpose and identity. The decision became easier when I received a call that afternoon from Dr. Summers at the community college. She was calling to offer me an expanded role that would include curriculum development for a new certificate program in personal financial planning. Your courses have been so successful that we want to build a comprehensive program around financial literacy education, she explained. We're talking about a 6-course certificate that would cover everything from basic budgeting to retirement planning to estate planning. Would you be interested in heading up the development of this program? The opportunity was everything I could have hoped for professionally. It would establish me as a recognized expert in financial education, provide steady income, and allow me to help hundreds of additional people improve their financial situations. But accepting it would also mean openly defying Rebecca's wishes and potentially causing further family conflict. I asked Dr. Summers for time to consider the offer, and I spent that evening discussing it with James. His perspective was unequivocal. Catherine, you can't let your daughter's insecurities prevent you from pursuing opportunities that could benefit hundreds of people. You found something you're genuinely good at, something that makes a real difference in people's lives. Don't give that up because Rebecca is uncomfortable with her mother being more successful than she expected. His characterization of Rebecca's concerns as insecurities rather than legitimate worries provided a new framework for understanding the family conflict. Perhaps her objections weren't really about my qualifications or the risks of my activities. Perhaps they were about her discomfort with seeing her mother in a role that challenged her assumptions about aging, gender, and expertise. The conversation with James helped clarify my priorities. I called Dr. Summers the next morning and accepted the position as director of the new financial literacy certificate program. The announcement of my expanded role generated significant interest from both local media and professional organizations. The Denver Post ran a feature story about the new program that included quotes from me and testimonials from my students. The Colorado Association of Financial Planners invited me to speak at their annual conference about financial literacy education. Most significantly, I was asked to join the board of directors of a nonprofit organization focused on improving financial literacy among older adults. The board position would provide additional credibility and expanded opportunities to influence financial education policy. Each of these recognition opportunities reinforced my confidence in the path I've chosen. I was building a professional reputation based on demonstrated expertise and measurable results. The validation was coming from sources that mattered: educational institutions, professional organizations, and the people whose lives I was helping to improve. Rebecca's reaction to news of my expanding responsibilities was predictably negative. She called to express her continued concerns and to suggest that I was getting deeper instead of recognizing my limitations. But her disapproval was offset by unexpected support from other family members. My sister Linda called from Phoenix to congratulate me on her professional achievements. She said, "I always knew you had it in you," she said with genuine pride. "Mom would have been so proud to see what you've accomplished." My nephew David, Rebecca's cousin, reached out to ask if I would be willing to consult with him and his wife about their retirement planning. "Rebecca told us about your financial expertise," he said, apparently missing the irony. "We could really use some guidance about investment strategies." Even more surprising was a call from Derek's father, who had heard about my teaching through mutual friends. He said, "I've been looking for someone to help me understand my 401k options. Would you be willing to meet with me to discuss investment strategies?" The growing recognition of my expertise from people who actually knew me personally provided a sharp contrast to Rebecca and Derek's continued skepticism. It became increasingly clear that their objections were outliers rather than representative of how others viewed my qualifications and activities. The St. Margaret's Investment Society celebrated my professional success with characteristic enthusiasm.
Eleanor organized a special dinner to honor my achievements, and each member contributed stories about how my involvement had enhanced their own investment knowledge and results. "You've brought fresh energy and perspective to our group," Margaret said during the dinner.
Your teaching background has helped us become better at explaining our strategies to others. Dolores nodded in agreement. And your organizational skills have made us more systematic about our research and documentation. Rose raised her glass in a toast. To Catherine, who proves that expertise comes from dedication and hard work, not from age or credentials. The evening was both celebratory and bittersweet. I was surrounded by women who had become genuine friends and mentors, who had supported my growth and celebrated my achievements. But I was also acutely aware that my own daughter remained unable to recognize or appreciate what I'd accomplished. That contrast became even sharper a few weeks later when I received an invitation that represented the pinnacle of professional recognition in my field. The National Association of Personal Financial Advisors asked me to deliver the keynote address at their annual conference on the topic of financial literacy education for older adults. NAPFA was the premier organization for fee-only financial planners, and being invited to address their conference was an honor typically reserved for the most respected experts in the field. The invitation acknowledged that my work had achieved national recognition among professionals who understood the importance and complexity of financial education. Preparing for the keynote required months of research and preparation. I developed a comprehensive presentation that combined my academic knowledge with practical insights gained from teaching hundreds of students. I included case studies that demonstrated the real-world impact of effective financial education. The presentation was scheduled for the opening day of the conference, and the audience included over 800 financial planning professionals from across the country. Standing at the podium looking out at that sea of expertise, I felt a moment of imposter syndrome that reminded me of Rebecca's criticisms. But as I began speaking, my confidence returned. The material I was presenting was based on solid research, extensive experience, and measurable results. I had earned the right to address this audience through years of dedicated study and successful practical application. The response was overwhelmingly positive. During the question and answer session, multiple attendees asked about specific aspects of my curriculum and teaching methods. Several conference participants approached me afterward to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Most meaningfully, the conference organizers asked if I would be willing to return the following year to conduct a full-day workshop on curriculum development for financial literacy programs. The professional recognition provided validation that transcended my family's skepticism. I had achieved genuine expertise that was acknowledged by the most qualified professionals in the field. My knowledge and teaching abilities were respected by people whose credentials were unquestionable. But the recognition also highlighted the irony of my situation. I was being celebrated as an expert by financial planning professionals while being dismissed as incompetent by my own daughter. The disconnect was so profound that it forced me to reconsider not just my family relationships, but my understanding of how expertise is recognized and valued in society. The experience taught me that competence and recognition don't always align with traditional expectations about age, gender, and institutional affiliation. Sometimes expertise emerges from unexpected places and develops through unconventional paths. Sometimes the people closest to us are the least able to recognize our growth and achievements. Most importantly, I learned that seeking validation from others, even family members, couldn't be the primary motivation for pursuing meaningful work. The satisfaction had to come from the work itself, from the knowledge that I was making a positive difference in people's lives, and from the continued growth and learning that kept me engaged and energized. As I flew home from the NAPFA conference, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. 2 years earlier, I'd been a financially ignorant retiree looking for social connection at a church group.
Now, I was a nationally recognized expert in financial education with a growing professional reputation and expanding opportunities to make a difference. The transformation had required challenging fundamental assumptions about my own capabilities, confronting family dynamics that had limited my growth, and developing expertise in a field I'd never previously considered. But most significantly, it had required learning to trust my own judgment and pursue my own path, regardless of others' expectations or approval. The women who met every Thursday morning in the basement of St. Margaret's Episcopal Church had given me more than investment knowledge. They had shown me that it was possible to reinvent yourself at any age, to develop expertise through dedication and effort, and to find purpose and meaning in unexpected places. They had taught me that the opinions of others, even family members, couldn't define my worth or limit my potential. And they had demonstrated that sometimes the people who seem least likely to possess valuable knowledge are exactly the ones who have the most to teach. The call that changed everything came on a Thursday morning in March, 18 months after my NAPFA keynote. I was reviewing materials for my advanced portfolio management class when my phone rang. The caller identified herself as Jennifer Walsh, a producer for the financial news network CNBC. Miss Richardson, we're doing a segment on unconventional investment success stories, and your name came up repeatedly in our research. Would you be willing to appear on our morning show to discuss your investment philosophy and teaching methods? The invitation was both thrilling and terrifying. National television represented a level of exposure I'd never imagined. But it also offered an unprecedented opportunity to share what I'd learned with a massive audience. The interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday, giving me 5 days to prepare. Eleonora and the other women in the Investment Society were more excited than I was, offering to help me practice answers and choose appropriate attire for television. "This is your moment," Eleanor said during an impromptu coaching session at her house. "You have the opportunity to show the world that financial expertise can come from anywhere, that age and gender don't determine competence." The day of the interview, James drove me to the Denver studio where I would appear via satellite. As I sat in the small broadcast room with lights blazing and a camera pointed directly at me, I felt a familiar surge of nervousness mixed with determination. The host introduced me as Catherine Walsh, a 61-year-old former school administrator who has become one of the most sought-after financial educators in the country. The description felt surreal, but it was accurate. The interview covered my journey from financial ignorance to expertise, the Investment Society's collaborative approach to research, and my philosophy of making financial education accessible to ordinary people. I shared specific examples of how my students had improved their financial situations and discussed the common misconceptions that prevented people from taking control of their money. "What would you say to critics who argue that you lack traditional credentials in finance?" the host asked. "I'd say that the most important credential is results. My students are achieving their financial goals. My own investment portfolio has outperformed market indices, and professional organizations continue to seek my expertise. Traditional credentials are valuable, but they're not the only path to knowledge." The interview lasted 8 minutes, but the response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone started ringing before I'd even left the studio. The community college received dozens of calls requesting information about my courses. My email inbox filled with messages from people across the country asking for advice and guidance. Most surprisingly, I received a call from Rebecca that afternoon. For the first time in months, her voice contained something other than skepticism or disapproval. "Mom, I saw your interview on CNBC," she said. "I had no idea you'd achieved this level of recognition." The conversation that followed was different from any we'd had since my involvement in financial education began. Rebecca asked thoughtful questions about my work, expressed genuine interest in my teaching methods, and admitted that she'd been wrong to dismiss my expertise. I think I was having trouble adjusting to seeing my mother as someone other than, well, just my mother, she said with characteristic honesty. It never occurred to me that you could develop this level of expertise in something completely new. Her acknowledgement meant more to me than any professional recognition I'd received. Having my own daughter finally understand and respect what I'd accomplished felt like the completion of a journey that had begun in that church basement years earlier. The CNBC interview opened doors I hadn't known existed. Within weeks, I received invitations to speak at conferences across the country, consult with financial services companies on their educational programs, and contribute to national publications about retirement planning and investment strategies. A literary agent contacted me about writing a book on financial literacy for older adults. A documentary filmmaker wanted to create a film about unconventional paths to financial expertise. A major university invited me to develop a curriculum for their continuing education program. Each opportunity reinforced the reality that I'd built something meaningful and lasting. I wasn't just a retired school administrator who'd gotten lucky with some investments. I'd become a recognized expert whose knowledge and experience were valued by professionals across the financial services industry. But the recognition that meant the most came from an unexpected source. The St. Margaret's Investment Society had grown to include over 30 members, and we'd collectively built investment portfolios worth more than $40 million. Our success rate had attracted attention from academic researchers studying investment clubs and collaborative decision-making. Dr. Maria Santos from the University of Colorado's Business School approached us about participating in a longitudinal study of investment club performance. Her preliminary analysis showed that our group had achieved returns that exceeded 90% of professional mutual funds while maintaining lower volatility and risk levels. Your collaborative research process and long-term investment philosophy represent a model that could revolutionize how individuals approach personal investing, she told us during our first research interview. You've demonstrated that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary results through education, patience, and systematic analysis. The academic validation was particularly satisfying because it confirmed what we'd known intuitively. Our approach worked not because we'd been lucky, but because we'd been disciplined, thorough, and committed to continuous learning. As I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point, I realized that the transformation hadn't just been about learning to invest money or teach financial literacy. It had been about discovering capabilities I didn't know I possessed, overcoming assumptions about age and gender, and finding the courage to pursue opportunities that challenged conventional expectations. The women who'd welcomed me into their church basement investment discussions had given me more than financial knowledge. They'd shown me that expertise could be developed at any age, that collaboration enhanced individual capabilities, and that meaningful work could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. Most importantly, they demonstrated that the labels society assigns based on age, gender, and appearance often have nothing to do with actual competence or potential. The fossils had turned out to be some of the most sophisticated investors I'd ever encountered, and they'd helped me become something I'd never imagined possible. Eleanor, now 75, continued to discover promising investment opportunities and share her insights with new members of our group. Margaret had recently returned from a business trip to Singapore, where she'd researched Asian market opportunities. Dolores had opened a second gallery to showcase her watercolor paintings, funded entirely by investment profits. Rose's catering business had evolved into a restaurant that employed 12 people and generated substantial passive income. Helen had completed her memoirs and was working on a book about investment strategies for women. Joyce had become a mentor to younger women entering the real estate industry. Patty had achieved her goal of running a marathon and was training for a triathlon, proving that physical challenges were as conquerable as financial ones at any age. Each of these women continued to grow, learn, and achieve new goals well into their 70s and beyond. They'd refused to accept society's limitations on what older women could accomplish, and their example had inspired me to do the same. As I prepared for my next speaking engagement, I thought about the message I wanted to share with my audience. It wasn't just about investment strategies or financial planning techniques. It was about the power of continuous learning, the value of collaborative relationships, and the importance of refusing to be limited by others' expectations. The woman who entered that church basement looking for social connection had discovered something far more valuable: the ability to reinvent herself, contribute meaningfully to others' lives, and build expertise that commanded respect regardless of traditional credentials. The fossils had turned out to be millionaire investment partners, but more than that, They'd become lifelong friends and collaborators in a journey of continuous growth and learning. Together, we'd proven that the most limiting beliefs about age and potential exist primarily in the minds of those who refuse to question conventional assumptions. The future remained full of possibilities, and I was excited to see what challenges and opportunities lay ahead. The foundation we'd built was solid, the knowledge we'd gained was substantial, and the network we'd created was stronger than ever. Most importantly, we learned that it was never too late to become someone completely new, to develop expertise in unexpected areas, and to make meaningful contributions that would outlast any individual achievement. The fossils, it turned out, were not only alive and thriving, but were continuing to evolve in ways that defied every stereotype and exceeded every expectation. And I was proud to be counted among them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.